Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Welcome to the MuseCast. Thank you for joining us today. Shawna Boren, Dan Kent. Dan is back in Minnesota. He brought some sunshine with him. Thank you for that, Dan.
You're welcome. I had to carry it in my truck, and I had a lot of funny looks when I was going through Illinois, but I thought it was worth it.
Yeah, for sure. Totally worth it. So it's good to have Dan back and at home and ready to roll. So we've got purely Minnesota MuseCast coming at you. And we have moved into our next little mini-series within our overarching Sermon on the Mount series. And this one is called Change of Heart, correct?
That's right.
Right.
Yeah,
Is that right?
yeah.
Did I get that right? Okay.
That's the series.
And that's the mini series. The sermon, this first sermon that Greg gave from this new mini series that is within the overarching Sermon on the Mount series was entitled A Farewell to Anger. And oh boy, like nothing like dealing with heart issues and going like right off the bat with anger.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we jumped in. Yeah.
We jumped in, and Dan and I were saying how this will be a fun conversation talking about how we're all a bunch of murderers because of the ways in which we've had anger in our heart. Anyway, So we're just going to dive in. Dan's going to give us a summary. We're going to show some reflections, and that'll be great.
Yep.
It'll be wonderful. So take it away, Dan.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, it's he really did. I mean, he started this series off, hard hitting. And it's also, I love this Sermon on the Mount series too because of the layers of it, where we have this Sermon on the Mount series, but then we have these series within the Sermon on the Mount series, and then really what we're finding out is each of these little pieces of text could also be a series, and so we're going to go a couple weeks on anger here. And there's a lot that is still that we still have to unpack. But this week, Greg kicked us off. And, Shawna, I was thinking, like, I can't think of a more relevant, culturally relevant message than what Greg just spoke of. And we did a series, if you remember, when we were talking about, faith and politics. And I felt like when we were doing that faith and politics series that, it was great. There's a lot of good stuff there, but I felt like there was something missing. And I think this is it. This sort of fulfills that series as well.
Yes.
And so what Greg did
it brings that series into fulfillment, right?
That's right.
That was like a foreshadowing, and this is the fulfillment of that.
Yeah. Greg did not come to, disregard that series. He came to fulfill that series. That's right. Yeah.
That's right.
So Greg kicks off this. The verse is Matthew 5, particularly verse 21, where Jesus says, "You have heard it said from people long ago that you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister is subject to judgment." And what Jesus is getting at here is that it's you're just as subject to judgment, even if you have the emotional sort of seeds that grow and flower to murder. And so he really raises the bar here on the type of heart that Jesus expects. And so this brings a lot of questions up, like, well, it seems like some anger is good. In particular, it seems like righteous anger is a good thing. And so that Greg really looks at that. And when Greg was talking about this, I'm like, well, yeah, of course, righteous anger is good. And that fuels things like protesting, and it fuels revolutions that are godly. And but Greg, in looking at the text, honestly, kind of let the text challenge him, and with the help of Bruxy Cavey at the meeting house, kind of came to the conclusion that no, anger is not good as a fuel. In fact, there's one thing that the Bible tells us to do with anger, and that is to get rid of it. And so the passage that he looks at is Ephesians 4:26 and 27, where it says, be angry, fine, but do not sin. And then also, when you have that anger, what you're supposed to do with it is to get rid of it. That is, don't let the sun go down before you've gotten rid of this anger. And so what Greg is saying is that it's okay if we have this frustrated or angry response to something. That's an indicator that there's an injustice going on, and if you don't feel that, then there's something wrong with your machine. But the indicator is not supposed to be a permanent part of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
You're supposed to turn that light off. You're supposed to get that light off. You don't want to partner with that anger. You want to use the anger to bring all of your other resources to bear: your compassion, your love, your charisma, or whatever things you have to bring all that other stuff. Don't bring anger to it. And I just thought that was so profound. And then he talked about you know to think about this, because this is a pretty radical teaching. And he asks this question, if you are contemplating trying to live into this idea where you're going to get rid of anger instead of using it as fuel, or instead of making it part of your identity, but you're scared, like, because you've just anger has been like a central part of how you've lived. He asks, well, what do you have to lose? And because that kind of gets at why we cling to it, because we feel like we lose something. And one thing is, we fear that we will miss out on that fuel, that kind of energy. And what he argues is that uh, you should be fueled by love. You should be fueled by compassion and empathy and things like that. Um, and then finally, he talks about, or two more things. He talks about righteous indignation. If this teaching is true, then it seems like there is no righteous anger really for us. Maybe there is for God, but for us, there's certainly not, because the Bible tells us over and over again to get rid of it. So whatever we think we're getting by anger, we need to find something else to give that. So whether it's compassion or whatever. And then finally, by doing this, because anger, even when we get angry, we have this slight sort of downward look toward others. And when you're angry, you have this bitter, this kind of demeaning opinion of another person. And of course, the big situation that we're all angry about now, and we're all fighting anger now, is with police brutality in Minnesota. Here we've got the Chauvin case is just starting up.
Mm-hmm.
And remembering the George Floyd, this is all on the news, and so all of the George Floyd stuff is being shown again, and we're seeing this video again, and so we all fight with this anger, and it's so easy to just view like a person who could do this. What kind of person could do this? And even that question is, you're questioning that there might be a different type of person, in particular a less than person. And that's the seed that leads to murder, and that's the seed that leads to all sorts of ungodliness. And by saying, no, I'm not going to even ask those questions, I'm not even going to allow anger to fuel me, now suddenly I can follow what Paul says in Ephesians 6:4, and that's to recognize that my battle is not against flesh and blood. It's not against Chauvin. It's against the principalities and powers and the systems that create this situation, that create Chauvin, and that create a world where the color of your skin can make you more vulnerable uh, to wickedness and to evil. And so that's sort of the gist of it, and that's really simplifying what Greg was saying, and there's a lot more there, and you got to watch it. But you mentioned this when we first clicked on and joined, is you're still chewing on this, and so am I. And so I would love to hear your thoughts. Like, what are you chewing on about this?
Yeah. When before we hit record, I was just sharing with Dan how I'm just really still reflecting and processing. And I think it's okay to say that to you guys. Hopefully we're all reflecting and
Yeah.
processing. And especially like Dan said, that how culturally relevant and how timely this message is. Feels like that's been happening a lot lately, with what's going on in our city, in particular with the Chauvin case. And so I'm really reflecting on what it means to not partner with anger. That was one of those light bulb moments for me, because I love that Greg was very realistic and said, now to say that you don't get angry is really, that's not true. We are
Right.
humans and we are emotional beings. We were created that way. And there are things that happen in our lives, maybe to people that we love or causes that we care about, where it feels like they're being demeaned by others or being treated as less than valuable. And so that causes anger to arise within us sometimes. And that is normal. But the light bulb moment for me was when he says, but we can't partner with that.
Yeah.
Think about like when you partner with something, it's like you come hand in hand with it. You walk alongside it. You go on a journey with it. You maybe help it flourish and grow. And I just was like, oh my gosh, I can't be a partner to anger. I can't come hand in hand with it, walk alongside it, go on a journey and help it to grow and flourish, because that is going to lead to devastation. And that makes me no better than someone who takes another person's life, you know.
Yeah.
So that is something that I've really, really been chewing on. And so then I get to this little place of, well, I don't always act out on my anger. I've learned how to control my actions. But then I sense the
Mm.
spirit nudging me that, yeah, but do you control what's going on internally? And Greg talked about that too. Like if you even think these things, you're setting on that path, on that journey to destruction, and that's not good. And so I wish I could say that here on a Tuesday, I finally have it figured out and I'm
Right.
good to go, but I don't. I
Yeah.
don't. And so where I am in this moment is that I recognize when things creep up that make me angry. And even if I feel justified in my anger, I have to commit to not partnering with that and giving that over to God and trust Him to take care of my heart, to take care of my emotions, to take care of whatever else it is that is causing that to rise up within me. And then look for ways and places and people and situations in which I can partner to maybe bring about a change in the
That's right.
situation that is making me so angry. So
Yeah.
I know we just kind of went all over the place there, but those have
Yeah.
just been some of my reflections as I listened and listened again and
Yeah.
read over the sermon summary, and yeah,
Yeah.
just a lot
Well,
going on there.
yeah, well, I'd say a couple more things too. You talked about all of the inner stuff that's going on, and I think if we take this message seriously, I think we all have to think about, how do I respond to my anger, and what role
Hmm.
does anger play in my life? And it's such a central
Hmm.
question, and it's not a question that I've asked myself a lot.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a very important message. And but one thing I do know is that some people, uh the point that you made is that it's okay to feel angry. In fact, I would even say some people need to feel angry. Some people
Hmm.
have avoided anger, and there's a
Hmm.
reason why we have that mechanism there. And so, if you've been abused, or if you've been especially, I think of like sexual abuse survivors, how
Hmm.
a lot of times, healing for them is when they get angry, when they
Hmm.
allow that anger to surface. Again, you don't want to marry that anger. You want to, feel that. You
Right.
want to feel the emotions. But the other thing too is, when we talk about anger, I think a lot of us immediately think of our anger toward others. But I know a lot of people wrestle with anger at themselves too. And
Hmm.
in fact, there's one school of thought in psychology which says that most depression is simply anger turned inward. And
Wow.
so, getting a handle on what role anger plays in your life can really liberate people from a lot of different things. And so, I think we've just barely dipped our toe in this, but I hope people
Hmm.
kind of wrestle with this and reflect on it in their own lives. The other thing I'll
Yeah.
say. The other thing I'll say is that it just so happens I'm reading Osheta's book this week, and Greg was talking about this, and I got to tell you, Osheta really is a good model of this. Many times throughout this book, she's modeled this identifying a great injustice or identifying
Mhm.
a painful event that happened in her life, and her initial response, which involves anger, and how she has confronted that anger and decided not to partner with it, and decided to lean on her other emotions and her other resources instead. And it's inspiring how she models this. In fact, this is one quote. I just found this while you were talking, so there's better quotes than this, but she says this: I will not allow white supremacy to turn me into a bitter and afraid person toward white people.
Yeah.
However, I will not stay silent or explain away issues of systemic racism to pacify white anxiety. I will forge a third way that gives unto Caesar what is Caesar's and God what is God's. And that is exactly
Mhm.
what we're talking about here. Is like you don't want to just like suppress the anger and do whatever you can to quell the anxiety. You want to
Yeah.
take seriously what caused that anger, but at the same time, you don't want
Yeah.
to be a bitter, afraid person either. You don't want to just be a slave to that anger. You want to find this third way, and that third way takes work. And so,
Yeah.
kudos to
Yeah.
Osheta.
I love
Very lucky.
that.
Yeah.
That is so, yeah, I can't wait to read her book. I think it is so important. I love that you brought up the piece of this about anger towards ourselves, because I think even if you would say that you're not a angry person or one who angers easily, I am confident that we have all experienced anger towards ourselves. And sometimes that's the toughest anger to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the key is that we have to deal with it, whether it's toward ourselves, whether it's toward another, whether it's toward a system or an institution, whatever it is, whatever is causing that emotion, we have to deal with it, because I think we've all seen in some way, shape, or form, or experienced in some way, shape, or form when anger explodes, right? Because it
Yeah.
keeps getting stuffed and not dealt with and stuffed and not dealt with. And that is so unhealthy. And when it explodes, holy buckets, that's just really, really not good. And so I
Mm.
think it's important to recognize when we're experiencing that emotion. I think it's important to deal with it as much as you can in that moment, but certainly, like scripture tells us, before the sun goes down. And I got to think that that's wisdom, right?
Yeah, right.
Imagine
Right.
that wisdom from the scriptures. Wisdom to say, we can't, if we hold on to that overnight, if it seeps into our soul, into our subconscious while we sleep, I got to think it's just going to do grander and uglier things. But you have a background, Dan, in counseling and psychiatry and therapy and all of that. So am I off my rocker by thinking that, like by holding on and festering, that it
Mhm.
becomes more cancerous and dangerous for us?
I don't think so at all. In fact, I think it even gets kind of irrational. Like the narrative that
Hmm.
caused, or the situation that caused it, becomes a narrative that kind of creeps away from reality. And the
Hmm.
perpetrators become more evil, and the pain becomes more extreme, and kind of like it's a kind of a dark version of the I once caught a fish this big, and it
Right.
just it just it grows, and then you can start to identify with it, and it becomes part of who you are.
Hmm.
And the Bible tells us that we're who we are. We're not
Yeah.
the injustices that we've experienced, and all of that. The other thing I'll say is that I do have a lot of experience in counseling, but this message is not taught in counseling. uh and
Mm.
this is a very unique Christian message, and I think it's important. And the other thing is,
Mhm.
I am not good at not letting the sun go down on my anger. In fact, what I do, Shauna, I tend to minimize
What?
things. Yeah, I know. Can you believe it?
No. I actually, I am so surprised. I would never think you would A, ever get angry, or B, hold on to it and let the sun
Yeah.
go down. I'm
What
shocked.
what I do, here's what I do is I minimize it. And so I'm like, it's not a big
Mm.
deal, and then I
Mm.
try to shrink it down to a more palatable size, but it still festers there. And it has historically, it's come out in places where it's like, where did that come from? And it came from
Mhm.
all of these little things that I was too lazy to deal with before the sun went down, and it popped up in this very inconvenient time. So that's a problem I've had.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
um
Dan, thank you for sharing that, honestly. Yeah, when you do that, when you just kind of, minimize, push it aside, not deal, gosh, someone else is going to catch it or
That's
something
right.
else is going to catch it. And they're going to be like, what
Yeah,
did
exactly.
I, it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
you can't save that for
Shauna,
another day.
Shauna,
It's not
I've
like a
just
good piece of
embarrassed.
pizza. Why?
I have embarrassed myself because of that.
Oh,
So it's important to deal with
yeah,
things as soon as possible. So,
it
I mean,
truly is. It
sometimes
truly
you need
is.
space, but as
Yeah,
soon as possible,
absolutely.
deal with stuff. So,
Yeah, we have taught our kids, 4 kids, big personalities. Imagine that. But if conflict arises, like we have one who wants to immediately like deal with it and talk it through it, and we have another who's like, I need a minute. I need to just gather myself, gather my thoughts, kind of process stuff. And so you have you have to learn how to navigate all of that.
that's right.
Um, a couple of things that Greg mentioned that I love. I love that we continue to be who we are as a body of Christ at Woodland Hills, regardless of what sermon we're teaching, preaching, what scriptures we're looking at. I loved that he brought up the fact that so many people, when they have this, when they're combating or fighting against this whole thing about anger and how many times it leads to violence, they always want to bring up the passage of Jesus in the temple and
Mm,
how he cleared the temple. And so I was really thankful that he brought that up and kind of nuanced that to show, okay, yes, but this is really what was going on there. I thought that was super important because
yeah.
inevitably that's what comes up. But I also love, as a woman, I have to say, I love that he gave permission for those who maybe have felt like they couldn't um, admit to having anger or express their anger, for all the reasons, why. I love that he gave those people permission, like feel the anger,
Yeah.
deal with the anger. You need that. But like he said, and Bruxy said, and you said, we got the trifecta there. Like anger is a tool. It's like a warning light that goes off, like on your vehicle, that says, "Hey, something's wrong here." And so, yeah, deal with it, acknowledge it, like figure it out. Don't cast it aside and
Yeah.
and push it down and don't be Dan. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I've done that too. Oh my goodness, I have done it. Like misplaced outbursts of anger that was meant for something else that I just never
Yeah.
dealt with. I think we've all been there.
Yeah. Huh.
Mm.
Well, there is one last thing I wanted to say, and maybe this is a good way to close it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it's a great way to wrap it up.
Good. Yeah, I feel like this message is so important, and I also feel like it's radical to the extent that I think a lot of people are still like, I don't know if that's realistic, and
Yeah.
and it might not even be prudent, And so Greg said this, and I wrote it down. I had to pause and rewind a couple times to get it, but he said this, and I think it's worth processing along with how we process anger in our lives. But
Mhm.
he says, whenever we find that it's obvious to us that Jesus can't be saying what he seems to be saying, be careful with that. What
Yes.
history, what history shows us and what our own lives probably show us is that it's very, very easy to enthrone our own culturally conditioned idea of what common sense is and to make that idea of common sense lord over our life. And once you make your culturally conditioned common sense lord of your life, well, now all of Jesus's teachings have to be interpreted through that lens and through that grid, and they all get watered down accordingly. And so what he's saying there is that, we might read Jesus and say, well, that's, he can't clearly mean that. And the reason
Yeah.
why we think he can't clearly mean that is because we have this whole lens that's been created from, the music we listen to, and the family we were raised in, and the neighborhood we grew up in, and the movies that we watch, and what wisdom looks like in all of these different contexts. And so we bring all of that to the text, and we say, well, Jesus can't clearly mean that. And when we
Right.
say that, what we're doing is we're allowing this whole soup of cultural influence to interpret what Jesus is saying. And what Greg is saying is that, well, wait a minute, sometimes Jesus might be challenging what our culture thinks is wise and what our culture thinks is common sense. And so I think this is one of those cases. This is one of the cases where maybe our common sense is not a good measure for whether or not Jesus' teaching here is right. Because look, our common sense has led to genocide, 2 world wars, atomic bombs. It's not working. Our common sense is not working. And this is an opportunity where Jesus comes and gets up in the grill of our common sense. And what we need to do is we need to be open to allowing this teaching to challenge us as well.
I love it. Jesus comes to get up in the grill of our common sense. That's so well said. Everything else too, but that was that bumper sticker moment, Dan. Yeah, who are we going to give the authority to? Who are we going to trust? Like our common sense, our wisdom per se, our experience, our lens, or are we going to actually trust that maybe Jesus said what he meant? And we need to examine that a little clearer. Like, it's a good point. It's a great point.
Yeah. Well, good.
I am so glad that this isn't just a one and done. You know, I'm glad that we're going to talk about this some more and learn more and grow more and be challenged more. So I'm glad. I'm terrified, but I'm glad because I think it's so necessary. So stay tuned, right? More to come.
That's right.
All
It's funny. Hey, really quick, in case the audio gets messed up here, Greg texted me and it totally screwed with my AirPods, and so hopefully the audio went through while you were talking. But, anyway,
hopefully.
Thanks, Greg.
That's all right. Way to go, Greg. Leave us alone already, man. No. Hey, thanks guys for joining us, for coming along this ride, being a part of this conversation, and please continue to reflect on this, pray about this, see where maybe you're being challenged a little bit, hopefully, and come back next week because we're going to go at it again. We're going to talk about this some more and it's going to be really good. Be well, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
See you later.